Imagine if a significant part of Jesus' true mission had never been told in the traditional Gospels. What if, behind the parables repeated ad nauseum in churches, there was a deeper, coded teaching, passed on only to those prepared to understand the mysteries of the Spirit? A knowledge not intended for the masses, but for initiates willing to cross the veils of common reality. This was the true path followed by very close disciples, a path not limited to moral precepts or blind faith, but leading to the transmutation of the self through 7 spiritual stages, the 7 flames. The silence around these flames was no accident. It was imposed. This silence was maintained for centuries to keep humanity distant from its own inner divinity. These secret teachings were not merely suppressed. They were fragmented, hidden beneath layers of symbolism and institutional indoctrination. Writings such as the Gospel of Thomas, that of Mary Magdalene, and that of Philip are echoes of this veiled knowledge. In these texts, Jesus does not appear as a savior to be worshipped, but as an initiatory guide leading his disciples on a deep inner journey. He did not promise an external paradise, but spoke of a kingdom of heaven that could only be accessed within the human being. This simple inversion changes everything. It shifts the focus from worship to transformation, and that's where the path of the 7 flames begins. Jesus was more than a master of compassion. He was a master of energy, an activator of consciousness. In the eyes of those who followed him closely, he taught through vibration, presence, and above all, silence. His most powerful words often came accompanied by long moments of contemplation. There was no rush. There was transmission. He not only spoke about the Father, he embodied the very divine spark that resides in all human beings, and he expected his disciples to do the same. The rituals, private meetings, and practices of fasting, meditation, and silence point to an advanced initiatory tradition, far removed from what was institutionalized centuries later. The metaphor of the sacred fire, or flames, strongly appears in various biblical passages and Gnostic texts, but its true meaning has been distorted. The fire does not represent punishment, but rather purification, transmutation, rebirth. The 7 flames are states of consciousness and layers of spiritual evolution that each disciple of Jesus was invited to embark on. These stages were linked to energy centers of the body, to the awakening of the inner light, to the dissolution of the ego, and to the union with the inner Christ. They were not theoretical concepts, they were lived experiences. Each flame was a portal, and Jesus, as the initiating master, held the key to open these portals for those who were ready. Mary Magdalene was one of these initiates. Far beyond the mistaken image imposed for centuries, she was a profound connoisseur of the hidden teachings. In the Gospel of Mary, it is she who understands and clearly conveys the highest teachings after Jesus' ascension. John, the beloved disciple, was another direct initiate. He was not just the favorite, but the one whose sensitivity and silence allowed a deeper connection with the inner levels of the path. These disciples formed a more intimate circle, who received not just words, but experiences. And these experiences formed the basis of what would come to be known as the steps of the 7 flames. The Gnostic tradition, linked to the Essenes and other mystical schools of the time, preserved fragments of this path. However, over time, these teachings were silenced, first by the force of the Roman Empire, then by the church that grew based on political power and control of the spiritual narrative. The inner transformation taught by Jesus threatened this control. A human being who discovers the Christ within does not need intermediaries, and this was dangerous for structures that thrived on dependence. Thus, the hidden knowledge was replaced by dogmas, and the path of self-discovery turned into external idolatry. Despite all the effort to bury this wisdom, it never completely disappeared. Monks, mystics, and seekers in different parts of the world kept the secret flame alive. Their writings circulated in coded form, camouflaged as heresies, poetry, or allegories. Each generation had its guardians, those who were not satisfied with ready-made answers, who felt the inner call for something deeper. This call has spanned the centuries and reaches us today, stronger than ever. The collective soul of humanity is ready to remember what was forgotten. The return to Christic wisdom does not occur through the literal reading of the scriptures, but by activating the same stages that Jesus' disciples went through. The 7 flames represent this inner path. They do not belong to a religion. They do not require blind faith. They are invitations to a living, intimate, radically transformative journey. The first flame is not an external ritual, but the sudden awakening of presence. The second, the purification of the ego's ties. The third, the opening of the heart. And so on, up to the 7th, where the disciple fully unites with the inner Christ. Each of these stages is more than symbolic. They are profound experiences that reorganize the mind, body, and spirit. When Jesus' disciples gathered in silence, when they fasted, when they shared parables only among those who were ready, they were navigating through these flames. They knew the path was not linear. It required surrender, courage, and faith, not the blind faith of the temples, but the living faith of one who dares to plunge into their own mystery. They were crossing the bridge between the human and the divine, guided by the one who embodied both. This knowledge is not of the past. It is now. It resurfaces with greater intensity in this time of planetary transformation. The same call that echoed in the hearts of Mary, John, and many others pulsates today in the souls that feel displaced from conventional discourses, who know deep down that there is something more. The recollection of this path does not occur by imposition, but by resonance. It finds us when we are ready. When the veil of illusion begins to fade and the question arises, what if everything I was taught is just the surface? The journey of the 7 flames begins with this question. It is not easy nor comfortable, but it is liberating. It is the return to what we were before we were shaped by fear, guilt, and separation. It is the reunion with the inner master, with the spark that Jesus came to show us, not as an unreachable savior, but as a mirror of what we can become. The lost key is not in books nor in churches, it is in each one of us. And this video is an invitation to turn that key and cross together the portals of the sacred fire. The true beginning of the spiritual journey does not start with beliefs, doctrines, or outward rituals. It starts with a silent call that springs from the heart and echoes in every part of the being. The first flame among all is the gateway to remembrance. Not intellectual memory, but the living recognition that there is something dormant within us that has always known. Jesus didn't say, "Follow me," out of ego or control, but because he recognized in every human being the divine spark capable of awakening. The first flame is this moment of breaking with the state of unconsciousness, the instant when you stop living on autopilot and start to observe. Everything changes at this point. Nothing seems different on the outside, but inside, a new perception lights up. You are waking up from a long spiritual sleep. In the most intimate circles of his disciples, Jesus did not teach dogmas, but presence. He invited them to be silent, to observe, to be. When he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," he was not being metaphorical. He was referring to a state of awakened consciousness, accessible only when one abandons the noisy mind and enters the now. The first flame is the moment when you stop living in the memories of the past or the projections of the future and begin to touch the real, the eternal, what has always been. It is not a fleeting experience. It is an opening that forever transforms the way you see yourself and the world. This flame was often ignited through the gaze, the silence, or the magnetic presence of the Master. There wasn't much need for speech, as his energy already awakened something in others. The disciples reported that when they were near Jesus, something calmed within them. The mind ceased, and a vibrant peace emerged. This was the beginning of the first flame, the cessation of mental noise and the birth of pure attention. This experience was not theoretical. It was visceral, deep, undeniable. It marked the beginning of a new way of life, where being replaces having, and the present moment becomes the sacred dwelling. Mary Magdalene, initiated into the deepest mysteries, understood this presence in an intimate way. Her sensitivity was not a weakness, but a key to penetrate the subtler levels of reality. While many sought external signs, she delved into inner listening. Her connection with Jesus was not just emotional, but vibrational. She grasped the essence behind the words, and thus was one of the first to fully awaken the first flame. The Gospel of Mary shows that she understood that the path began in silence, in contemplation, in deep receptivity to the present moment. In the tradition of the Essenes, to which many scholars believe Jesus was connected, there were specific practices of vigilance, breathing, and stillness that aided in cultivating presence. Silence was sacred, not because it was the absence of sound, but because it was the field where the soul speaks. The gatherings of these groups involved long moments of immobility, not as a technique, but as a way to align with life. The first flame, therefore, was not a theory. It was an experience guided by the constant practice of attention and surrender. It was the beginning of the dissolution of the ego and the reconnection with the real self. This stage does not bring euphoria or miraculous visions. On the contrary, it often comes with a subtle discomfort. It's the moment when the seeker realizes how much they were asleep. The distractions of the world seem to lose their shine, and a silent dissatisfaction takes over. This emptiness, however, is fertile. It's the soil where the new can bloom. The seeker begins to notice their own thoughts, the repetitive patterns, the automatic judgments. And with this, a space arises between the observer and the observed. This space is the door to presence. It's the gentle fire that begins to burn the illusions. Jesus, as a master of presence, didn't seek conversions, but awakenings. When he said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear," he was speaking to those who had already accessed this deep listening, a listening that doesn't go through the mind, but through the soul. The miracles he performed weren't tricks to convince, but natural manifestations of an awakened consciousness, fully present. In the first flame, the seeker begins to realize that miracles aren't exceptions, but the expression of the real when in alignment with the source. Life ceases to be a sequence of random events and begins to be perceived as an intelligent dance. Practices such as mindful breathing, non-judgmental observation, intentional stillness, and body awareness were tools used among the initiates. Each gesture became a gateway. The simple act of walking, breathing, or eating became a sacred practice. Presence brings clarity, and with it, one begins to notice one's own conditioning, unconscious impulses, emotional automatisms. This observation, without repression or identification, is the fire of the first flame in action. It illuminates, reveals, heals, and the more one stays in it, the more the old self dissolves. This stage also marks the beginning of contact with the energy body. Many disciples reported sensations of heat, vibration, or expansion when in the presence of the Master or in deep meditation. These phenomena were not the goal, but signaled the realignment of the subtle centers. The first flame began to circulate, burning the veils of separation and awakening the consciousness of unity. Perception expands. Nature takes on a different glow. People are seen with more compassion. Judgments begin to cease. The seeker starts to see for the first time. This is the stage where everything seems to change and nothing changes. Life goes on with its tasks, responsibilities, and challenges, but there's something different about the one living it. The rush gives way to presence. Anxiety is replaced by a serene quietness. It's not about denying the world, but seeing it with new eyes. The sacred reveals itself in the simple. Each moment becomes a temple. And in this temple, the seeker begins to dwell. Jesus taught this not with speeches, but with his very being. His presence was the teaching, and those who were open began to feel this same presence within themselves. The first flame, therefore, is not a stage to be achieved, but a return to what has always been present. It is the living memory of the essence. There is no effort, only surrender. And with this surrender, the flow of life begins to guide the seeker. Choices become more intuitive, encounters more meaningful. Internal conflicts begin to lose strength. It's as if a new consciousness begins to direct the experience. The ego is not fought. It is dissolved by the light of mindfulness. And so, the journey continues. The fire of the first flame keeps burning, silent, vibrant, eternal. crossing the portal of presence awakens consciousness to an undeniable truth. The life one leads has been shaped by mental and emotional structures that were not consciously chosen. The second flame emerges as a transformative fire that seeks not to punish, but to purify. It is the stage where everything misaligned with the truth of being begins to be revealed and burned. It is here that the initiate, already awakened to himself, faces the burdens he carries: inherited beliefs, emotional attachments, old wounds, illusions of identity. Jesus taught that no one patches new cloth on old clothes, and this was the warning for this stage. One cannot carry the new self with the rags of the old self. The second flame is the purification of the inner temple, so that the light can dwell without distortions. Jesus' disciples, especially those closest to him, knew that the call to follow him was also a call to die. Not a physical death, but a symbolic one. The death of a conditioned identity. The ego, accustomed to asserting itself through control, fear, and pride, begins to crumble when exposed to the light of consciousness. This collapse is not easy. The second flame precisely consumes what is out of harmony, and it does so intensely. Internal pains, unresolved conflicts, repressed memories arise. Everything hidden under the veneer of personality emerges like smoke from a sacred fire. Jesus warned, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Purity here is not moralistic, but energetic. To see God is to perceive the essence in everything, and this is only possible when the heart is clean from the distortions of the ego. The purification practices among the Essenes included long periods of fasting, baths in running waters, absolute silence, and internal confrontations guided by spiritual mentors. The second flame was not faced alone. The initiate was supported by a community committed to truth. Each crisis was welcomed as a stage in the process. Mary Magdalene, in her profound journey, faced this purification with courage. Her accounts show a process of transmuting pain into awareness. What was once guilt and shame became compassion and clarity. Pain was no longer a burden, but a portal. The second flame freed her from all the internal voices that limited her. She was not only forgiven by Jesus, she forgave herself as the inner fire dissolved her old identity. At this stage, the body also reacts. Many initiates reported physical symptoms such as chills, tremors, unexplained fevers, intense sweating. It was the body releasing traumas, toxins, and old energetic blockages. Emotions surfaced like tides: anger, sadness, fear, shame. Everything came to the surface to be seen and released. The purification was not intellectual, but visceral. The fire of the second flame burned in every cell, in every memory trapped in the body. The rituals involved chanting, drumming, periods of solitude, walks in nature. It was not about running from pain, but diving into it until it revealed its truth. Pain, seen with awakened eyes, became a teacher. The main purification at this stage is that of beliefs. Those deeply rooted ideas that shape behavior, emotions, and the way the world is perceived. Beliefs like, "I am not worthy," "The world is dangerous," "I need to control everything," "God is distant," "I am separate from the divine," are gradually undone. Jesus exposed these beliefs with simple questions, which broke the mental foundations of his disciples. Why are you afraid? Logically, who told you that? Zrenya. Where is your faith? It was not about indoctrination, but about deconditioning. He brought his disciples to the point where all that was left was silence and surrender. Only then could the new be born. This process also reveals attachments, not only to things, but to roles, ideas, personal stories. Attachments to the victim identity, to controlling situations, to the desire for acceptance, to the fear of rejection. Each attachment is a chain that impedes the soul's flight. The second flame cuts these chains one by one, and each cut hurts, but each pain is liberating. The disciple begins to realize that he is not his emotions, his thoughts, his past. He is the space where all this happens. This perception strengthens with each release, and what once seemed essential for survival is now seen as unnecessary. There is also a purification in relationships. The vibrational energy of the initiate changes, and many connections based on need, manipulation, or convenience begin to dissolve. This can lead to moments of loneliness, but it also opens up space for new relationships aligned with the true self. The disciple learns to say no without guilt, to set boundaries with love, to value silence more than applause. Social masks fall. The inner fire no longer tolerates falsehoods. There is a radical sincerity that begins to emerge, with others and primarily with oneself. Pretending is no longer possible. This stage requires courage and perseverance. Many, upon feeling the heat of the second flame, retreat. The ego tries to reclaim control, seduces with old habits, attempts to distract. But the disciple who has tasted the first flame knows that there is no turning back. The only way out is through. And in this crossing, each release brings more lightness. The body becomes more vital, the mind clearer, the heart freer. There is a feeling of constant rebirth. Jesus said, "Unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." The second flame is this birth in pain and glory. Over time, the disciple begins to recognize fire as an ally. He no longer fears internal processes. He knows that every pain that emerges to be healed. That every belief undone makes room for the truth. That every attachment dissolved reveals more than what is lost. Life becomes a dance of letting go and receiving, of dying and being reborn. The flame does not destroy, it reveals. What is lost in truth was never real. It was only an illusion. And what remains, after the fire has passed, is what is eternal, untouched, sacred. The disciple is no longer a hostage of the inner world. He becomes master of himself. This purification also reflects in the way one views the world. The projections start to fall away. What was once judged in others is now seen as an internal reflection. The other ceases to be an enemy or savior. They are a mirror. The world ceases to be a threat and becomes a mirror as well. Everything begins to cooperate with the purification process. Even external challenges are now seen as allies. Life as a whole becomes a temple of transmutation, and the disciple, now freer and clearer, begins to feel the call of the next stage, to fully open the heart. When the fire of the second flame fulfills its role, what remains is a lighter, truer, more present being. The ego does not disappear, but it loses its throne. Emotions persist, but they do not rule. The mind thinks, but it does not dominate. A new center emerges, the heart, and that is where the journey continues. The third flame is lit, ready to illuminate the path of compassion, forgiveness, and unconditional love. But for the heart to truly open, it needs to be clean. And that is what the second flame offers. A purified heart, ready to love without fear, without attachment, without masks. After the intense purification of the second flame, where attachments and illusions began to dissolve in the fire of consciousness, the disciple approaches a new and at the same time ancestral territory. The heart is a center of wisdom, power, and direct connection with the divine. The third flame is not just an elevated emotional state. It is a living intelligence, a frequency of light that can only be ignited when the inner temple has been emptied of the burdens that previously obscured it. Here, love ceases to be a fragile feeling conditioned by exchanges and expectations. It reveals itself as a raw and sacred force, capable of healing, transforming, and uniting the visible with the invisible. The flame of the heart is the middle portal, the bridge between the lower and upper worlds. It is in this pink golden fire that the being anchors itself in universal love, not as a concept, but as a state of existence. Jesus spoke of this love through gestures, not lengthy speeches. When he healed, it was through the heart. When he welcomed the rejected, it was the heart that spoke. When he remained silent in the face of attacks, it was the heart that sustained his peace. He didn't love with effort. He was love in action. And this was not an exclusive gift. It was an invitation. His disciples knew that this flame needed to be ignited for miracles to occur, not as exceptions, but as natural expressions of a unified being. Mary Magdalene, John, and other initiates experienced this frequency in depth. Love, in its purest form, is not emotion. It is vibrant presence. It is embodied consciousness. It is the natural state of a being that has already freed itself from the layers of fear. In the Gnostic tradition, the flame of the heart was considered an internal altar. It needed to be prepared with devotion. It was the space where the divine clearly manifested. Many masters spoke of the sacred chamber of the heart, an energetic point not just metaphorical but perceptible, where the soul meets the spirit. The practices involved conscious breathing, meditation focused on the center of the chest, the visualization of a pink or golden light radiating love inward and outward. The disciples were trained to keep this center open even in the face of pain, betrayal, abandonment, because they knew that true freedom is born when one loves even without guarantees, when one remains compassionate even in the face of darkness. This stage also reveals the depth of forgiveness, but not conditional, superficial, or mental forgiveness. It's about a forgiveness that arises from the understanding that all actions, even the darkest ones, are expressions of unconsciousness. Jesus, when crucified, said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This was not a moral statement. It was a revelation from someone who saw with the eyes of the heart. The initiate of the third flame begins to perceive that forgiveness is mutual liberation. It is the end of the energetic ties that keep the past alive. When one truly forgives, one does not forget. One transfigures. Pain ceases to be a wound and becomes wisdom. The compassionate love that springs from this flame does not choose who it is directed towards. It flows like the sun, shining on both the just and the unjust. The enlightened heart is not selective. It welcomes. It recognizes the light even in the shadow. And that is why the third flame has the power to heal not only the initiated, but everyone around them. The energy emanated by someone with an activated heart crosses barriers, dissolves resentments, inspires transformation. It is not a manipulative power. It is a silent radiation, a field of presence that touches what is most true in each being. That is why the ancient masters said that a single awakened soul can transform an entire village. This flame also awakens the sacred feminine, not just in women, but in everyone. The sacred feminine is the energy of receptivity, intuition, fluidity, surrender. It is not passivity, but a superior form of strength. Mary Magdalene was the living embodiment of this principle. In many apocryphal Gospels, she is described as the one who understood with the heart, while the others were still trying to understand with the mind. The third flame invites the initiate to descend from the mind to the heart, to relinquish control and enter the flow, to trust in the intelligence of the unseen, to not demand proof, but to open oneself to the mystery with loving trust. It is also at this stage that the disciple begins to experience states of spiritual ecstasy, but unlike emotional euphoria, this ecstasy is serene, silent, profound. It's as if the heart expands beyond the body, embracing everything. It often comes accompanied by tears without apparent reason, a feeling of fullness or communion with everything that exists. These are not induced experiences. They arise naturally when the heart is free, and the more the initiate remains in this state, the more they become a pure channel for divine light. Their presence begins to heal, inspire, awaken effortlessly. Relationships also undergo profound transformations. The search for external validation begins to fade. Love is no longer possession, dependency, or projection. It becomes sharing. Connections are based on presence, listening, freedom. The disciple learns to love without expecting anything in return, to say, "I see you," with the eyes of the soul. Conflicts are resolved with empathy. Differences cease to be threats and become invitations to expansion. And when the other is not ready, the initiate remains in love, without judging, without trying to change. They understand that everyone is where they need to be. Another important aspect of the third flame is the openness to receive. Many spiritual seekers struggle to allow love in. They are so used to giving, caring, saving, that they forget that true abundance only circulates when there is exchange. The illuminated heart not only emanates, it also receives with gratitude. It recognizes the value of being welcomed, of being loved, of being seen. And this is not vanity, it's humility. It is acknowledging that love is not something to be conquered, but something to be allowed. The third flame also heals this blockage. It teaches that accepting love is as sacred as offering it. This stage also deepens the connection with the planet, with nature, with the unseen realms. The initiate feels empathy for all that lives. The suffering of animals, the pain of the earth, the beauty of a flower. Everything touches the heart in a new way. A sense of loving responsibility arises. Spirituality ceases to be a personal refuge and becomes a commitment to life. Every action is taken with awareness. Every choice is guided by love. And this love is not romantic, it's revolutionary. It's the love that sustains worlds, that moves galaxies, that pulses in every atom of the universe. The illuminated heart also becomes the throne of the inner Christ. It is in it that the divine presence firmly settles. Jesus said, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." When the heart is the treasure, the whole life aligns with the truth. There is no longer a division between the spiritual and the material. Everything is an expression of the divine. The disciple begins to live in a state of constant prayer, not as a repetition of words, but as a continuous surrender to the present moment. Prayer becomes breathing, looking, gesturing. It is living with the heart exposed to the sky. When this flame is active, the initiate feels an irresistible inner call to serve, share, expand. But this impulse does not come from need, but from fullness. It is the overflow of love that needs to give itself. This impulse marks the beginning of the transition to the next stage. The third flame, by illuminating the heart, prepares the disciple to access the silent wisdom that resides in the higher mind. It paves the way for listening to the soul, for spiritual vision, for the consciousness that observes everything with clarity. The journey now continues to the flame of the inner eye, where truth will be contemplated beyond words, and the inner light will find its reflection in the purified mind. After the heart has been ignited by the compassionate fire of the third flame, the initiate is finally prepared to cross one of the most challenging and revealing portals of the spiritual journey: the mind. Not the ordinary mind, filled with disordered thoughts and automatic judgments, but the silent mind, the empty mind, the mind that no longer interferes, only observes. The fourth flame represents the awakening of the inner eye, also known as the eye of wisdom, the eye that sees beyond form. It is at this stage that the disciple transcends the limitations of sensory perception and begins to see with the light of pure consciousness. The mind ceases to be a continuous noise and becomes a clear mirror, reflecting reality without distortion. The light of the fourth flame penetrates the inner world like a deep blue beam, illuminating what was once shadow and revealing the truth behind each thought. Jesus spoke in parables not to confuse, but to awaken this perspective. His stories were not simple plots, but keys to breaking rigid mental patterns. Those who listened only with the ears of logic did not understand, but those whose inner eye was open perceived the multiple levels contained in each word. The Gospel of Thomas contains enigmatic phrases that only make sense when the mind is silent. "If your eyes are good, your whole body will be light," he said. This eye is not physical. It is the subtle perception center located between the eyebrows, known by various traditions as the third eye, the seat of spiritual vision. When activated by the fourth flame, this center becomes a bridge between the heart and the spirit, and the initiate begins to see things as they really are, not as they seem to be. The silent mind is a rare achievement. It requires loving discipline, full attention, and a deep surrender to quietude. The masters of the path knew that thinking less did not mean being less intelligent, but more free. Constant, repetitive, and anxious thinking is an invisible prison, and as long as the mind is saturated with noise, the truth remains veiled. The fourth flame invites the disciple to disidentify from thoughts, to realize that it's not the content of the mind, but the consciousness that observes it. It's in this recognition that liberation begins. Thoughts pass like clouds, but the sky of the mind remains intact, vast, luminous. In this state, the inner eye opens and the vision expands. The practices to ignite this flame involve deep contemplation, meditations focused on breathing, visualizations of the point of light between the eyes, and above all, the practice of non-judgment. Judgment is the root of uncontrolled mental activity. When the disciple learns to observe without interpreting, without reacting, without labeling, they access a field of presence where everything is perceived in its essence. This state of pure observation allows wisdom to naturally arise. The answers come without effort. Decisions are made with clarity. Time seems to slow down. There is a higher intelligence operating beyond the common mind, and the disciple, now attuned to this intelligence, becomes a more subtle instrument of the divine. Inner silence is not the absence of sounds, but total presence. It is a quality of attention where everything is welcomed, but nothing is nurtured. Fear appears, is seen, but does not govern. Desire arises, is recognized, but does not manipulate. The mind becomes transparent, and the higher self begins to express itself more clearly. It's as if the static of the radio is eliminated, allowing the true transmission to be heard. Jesus demonstrated this with his serenity in the face of conflicts, with his clarity in responding to questions armed with malicious intentions. He did not react, he saw. And to see with the inner eye is to be beyond duality. It is to perceive the hidden purpose in every situation, even the most painful ones. Many disciples reported mystical experiences associated with the activation of the fourth flame. Symbolic visions, accurate intuitions, lucid dreams, and even perceptions beyond time and space. This was not empty mysticism, but evidence that the mind had become receptive to the quantum field of divine consciousness. This state is natural, but needs to be rediscovered. The common mind has been trained to resist silence. Therefore, the process of activating the fourth flame involves moments of frustration, resistance, and escape. But the more the disciple remains firm in observation without expectation, the more the mind yields, the more the blue flame intensifies, and the more the eye of the soul opens. The fourth flame also reveals the illusions of apparent reality. The initiate begins to perceive how thoughts create emotions, how emotions shape perceptions, and how these perceptions build a false identity. With the inner eye awakened, all of this becomes transparent. The disciple sees that he no longer needs to be a slave to the inner narrative. He can rewrite his story from the truth perceived in silence. It's a process of undoing, not accumulating. And in this simplicity, there is an unshakable peace. The mind ceases to be a labyrinth and becomes a passage. This stage also paves the way for spiritual telepathy, not in the fantastical sense of reading thoughts, but in the ability to perceive what lies behind words, to sense the true vibration of intentions, to understand without explanations. This deepens relationships. Judgment is replaced by empathy. Words become more precise. Speaking is guided by silence. The disciple begins to teach not only by what they say, but by the clarity of their mental field. Their presence communicates more than their speeches, and when they speak, their words carry power, for they spring from the center of truth, not from noise. The fourth flame also teaches about impermanence. The awakened mind realizes that everything passes. Thoughts, sensations, situations. Nothing remains fixed. This awareness frees the disciple from attachment to forms. The fear of change disappears. Control is replaced by trust. Acceptance becomes natural. And this acceptance is not resignation, it is wisdom, knowing what can and cannot be changed, knowing when to act and when to be silent. This wisdom is the direct result of the mind purified by the fourth flame. Over time, the disciple begins to inhabit two worlds simultaneously, the world of forms and the world of consciousness. He acts in the world, but does not lose himself in it. He thinks, but does not identify with his thoughts. He feels, but does not drown in his emotions. This inner freedom is one of the greatest achievements of the spiritual path. It is the foundation for the higher flames to ignite without distortion. Mental clarity becomes the cornerstone of the sacred expression that will follow, the living word. When the fourth flame shines fully, the disciple becomes a mirror of the divine. Their mind is a clear channel, their gaze reveals compassion, their presence conveys wisdom. They see themselves and the world through the eyes of eternity. Nothing escapes their silent perception. They no longer need to seek evidence, they know. And this knowledge is not intellectual, it's direct, it's lived. The silent mind doesn't seek answers, it allows the truth to emerge. And it is from this silent truth that the next stage of the journey springs. The activation of the word as a creative tool, vibrational healing, and an extension of awakened consciousness. When the mind is purified and the inner eye is awakened, the disciple approaches a sacred gift that shapes worlds and redirects destinies: the Word. The fifth flame is the activation of the living Word, one that is not born of ego or unconscious repetition, but from the meaningful silence of the mind, unified with the heart. This fire is not just about speech, but about vibration. It is the invisible force that materializes through the voice, the intonation, the intention, the presence that inhabits each syllable. The word, when consecrated by the light of consciousness, becomes an instrument of healing, creation, and spiritual alignment. It was with this ignited flame that Jesus said, "Let there be light." And there was light, who healed with a simple, "Rise up and walk," who calmed storms with silence, "Be still." The living word does not describe, it transforms. It does not merely communicate, it creates. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This statement from the Gospel of John is not poetic, it is a metaphysical revelation. The Word, the Logos, is the active principle of creation. The universe did not arise from a physical gesture, but from an original sound vibration. This vibration continues to sustain all reality. By accessing the fifth flame, the initiate begins to recognize their own word as an extension of this creative word. They understand that everything they say shapes their experience, strengthens or weakens their energy field, generates connections or ruptures. Therefore, this stage requires reverence. Speaking ceases to be an automatic act and becomes a conscious invocation of energy. Each spoken word becomes a seed cast into the field of existence. Jesus knew that the word was a bridge between worlds. He used language not to explain, but to convey vibrational codes. His parables were not didactic. They were tools to penetrate the unconscious and activate higher dimensions of the soul. The visible content of his speech was merely the surface. What truly touched the disciples was between the lines, in the tone, in the silence between the words, in the energy that enveloped his presence. The initiates reported feeling warmth, peace, or even inner visions when listening to him. This is the living word in action. It goes beyond mental understanding and settles directly into the heart and subtle body. It reorders, it awakens. The fifth flame also reveals the spiritual responsibility of speech. The initiate realizes that words spoken in anger, judgment, or irony poison not only the other person, but their own energy field as well. The vibrational poison of a word can linger for days in the subtle body of both the listener and the speaker. Similarly, a word spoken with truth, compassion, and faith can heal deep wounds, untie traumas, dissolve resentments. When a word is born from inner silence, it carries a force that does not need to be shouted. It enters like light into a dark room. That's why the ancient masters spoke little. Their words were precious, carefully chosen. And for that reason, they transformed. The practices to ignite this flame involve, first and foremost, silence. Not passive silence, but active silence, charged with mindfulness. The true word can only emerge from a field of deep listening. The disciple begins to train not only what he says, but where what he says comes from. He observes if he speaks to please, to manipulate, to defend himself, or if he speaks as an extension of the truth he perceives. Often, silence will be the most powerful response. Other times, a simple phrase, said at the right moment, will be capable of changing the course of a soul. This wisdom comes with the constant practice of listening to others, to life, and to one's own soul. Singing is also a powerful practice at this stage. Mantras, devotional chants, sacred intonations are ways of aligning speech with higher frequencies. Jesus' disciples used sung psalms at certain times of prayer and initiation. These melodies were not just religious, they acted on the energy fields, cleansing, strengthening, opening internal portals. The fifth flame recognizes sound as a path of ascension. Sound is not an accessory, it is essence. The right vibration can elevate states of consciousness, unlock emotions, awaken forgotten memories. Therefore, the initiate begins to listen and use sounds with reverence. He perceives the impact of the sound environment on his field. He chooses what he listens to, and he sings with intention. At this point in the journey, the disciple begins to use words as a tool of service. He guides, teaches, advises, shares not to assert himself, but to sow light. His speech starts to reflect not just knowledge, but embodied wisdom. He doesn't quote truths, he is the expression of them. His discourse does not seek to convince, but to inspire. And when he encounters resistance, he does not force. He withdraws in silence, knowing that the seed has been cast and that each soul germinates in its own time. The power of the fifth flame lies more in the state of the speaker than in the content of what is said. The vibration precedes the form. Presence precedes the word. The written word also becomes an extension of this flame. Letters, prayers, texts, poetry, everything that is gestated in inner silence and written with purity carries the vibration of the fifth flame. These words have life. They touch those who read them on levels that the mind cannot reach. That's why sacred texts, when written by true initiates, withstand time, translations, censorship. They carry layers that continue to reveal wisdom over the centuries. The disciple of the fifth flame begins to also become a channel of this living scripture. Their diary, their prayers, their teachings become vibrational records of light, echoes of the divine word. But there is an even deeper aspect of this flame, the word as decree. Here the disciple understands that their speech can command realities. They can, with awareness and faith, declare healings, open paths, dissolve blockages, not by magic, but by vibrational alignment. The decree is not a request, it is an affirmation. It is said with clarity, conviction, and love. And when pronounced, it reorganizes the subtle and physical field. Therefore, every true master is mindful of what they say, because what they say happens. And the fifth flame teaches that, on some level, this is true for everyone. Every human being is creating their own destiny with what they think, feel, and speak. Becoming aware of this is to become a conscious co-creator of one's own reality. With this flame lit, the disciple also learns to bless. Blessing is one of the highest expressions of the living word. To bless is not to wish luck, it is to invoke light upon someone or something. It is to recognize the divine present and activate it with the power of the word. Jesus blessed the bread, the sick, the disciples, the paths. His blessings were decrees of transformation. The disciple of the fifth flame begins to bless with the eyes, with the gestures, with the presence, but also with the word. He blesses himself, others, the challenges, life. And with that, everything around him transforms. The activation of this flame prepares the field for a vibrational leap. The disciple, now aware of the strength of their expression, feels the natural impulse to leave the inner space and start acting in the world in a more active way. The word becomes action. Consciousness manifests in attitudes. Compassion transforms into service. The fifth flame is not the end. It is the bridge that connects the inside to the outside. The flame of the living word awakens the will to offer the world what has been awakened in the being, and so the journey progresses towards one of the most luminous and challenging stages, altruistic service as an instrument of ascension. The journey through the flames is not a climb to the top, but a spiral that broadens consciousness while deepening humility. The sixth flame represents this pivotal turn in the spiritual path, the moment when the initiate understands, not just with the mind, but with the being, that they are not awakened for themselves, but for the whole. Service ceases to be an option or virtue, it becomes inevitable. The light accumulated in the heart and mind now cries out to be poured onto the world, not as sacrifice, but as a natural expression of inner fullness. The sixth flame is the compassionate irradiation of the awakened soul. It does not demand audiences, it does not depend on recognition, it does not feed on applause. It is silent, constant, firm. Jesus washed the disciples' feet, not to teach humility with words alone, but to show that every true master is above all a servant of the love that dwells within them. The violet flame that symbolizes this stage is the frequency of transmutation. When the disciple surrenders to service, their energy becomes a channel of healing for everything and everyone around them. But this healing is not planned. It happens simply because they are present. Where they step, the vibration rises. Where they speak, peace is established. Where they touch, the soul's memory is activated. They become a beacon that does not try to convince but only illuminates. And they illuminate without choosing, without measuring worthiness, without seeking return. This is spiritual service, the expression of lived unity. The disciple realizes that to serve is to use their own light. It is to remain in the flow of divine abundance that only renews itself when shared. This service is not confined to grand works. On the contrary, it reveals itself in small gestures, caring for an elderly person with tenderness, listening to someone without interruption, preparing food with full attention, offering a smile to those who carry the weight of the world. Each action, when performed with awareness and love, becomes an altar of transformation. The sixth flame dissolves the separation between the sacred and the everyday. Everything becomes a rite. Work, conversation, walking, everything is a vehicle of light. The disciple does not need to abandon the world to serve the divine. He does so by being in the world, but no longer being shaped by it. Mary Magdalene embodied this flame deeply. After Jesus' ascension, she did not seek leadership, titles, or recognition. She withdrew but continued to radiate. Wherever she was, there was healing. Her presence was a balm, not because she sought to heal, but because she had become a transparent channel of light. Her service was not visible to ordinary eyes, but was felt by souls. Many who encountered her never forgot her, and many who never saw her dreamed of her. This is spiritual service, to cross dimensions and touch the invisible with the vibration of active love. The sixth flame transforms the being into a living bridge between heaven and earth. This stage also confronts the last remnants of the ego. Even after purification, the spiritual ego may try to infiltrate, seeking validation through service. But the violet flame burns everything that is not genuine surrender. It reveals hidden intentions, dissolves roles, removes the character. The disciple at this stage learns to disappear in the act, serves and vanishes, gives and forgets, prays and does not tell, teaches and learns. He understands that true power does not manifest through visibility, but through the coherence between intention, presence, and action. Service is the offering of one's own existence to the divine flow of creation. Serving with active awareness also awakens dormant gifts. Many disciples, when they put themselves in service without expectation, began to manifest abilities they previously didn't know they had. Healing through hands, awakening words, precise intuitions, spontaneous channeling, constant synchronicities. These gifts are not earned. They are released when the being is ready to use them for the benefit of the collective. The sixth flame activates the archetypes of the priest, the healer, the guardian, the comforter, not as external roles, but as functions of the soul that naturally manifest when the surrender is complete. Another fundamental aspect of the sixth flame is the recognition of the individual mission. Each incarnated soul carries a unique note in the symphony of creation. When this note is ignored, existential emptiness arises, constant dissatisfaction, the feeling of not belonging. But when the disciple begins to serve according to their essence, everything falls into place. The mission does not need to be grand in the eyes of the world. It can be writing, listening, planting, teaching, welcoming, guiding. The important thing is that it is authentic, fluid, alive. True service is that which does not tire, that nourishes both the giver and the receiver. It is the dance of giving and receiving in its purest form. Serving also heals. By stepping out of the center of one's own suffering and looking at others with compassion, the disciple heals from the remaining wounds. Spiritual service is not just giving, it's expanding. By serving, the disciple's energy field amplifies, their light refines, their vibration elevates. The soul rejoices in sharing what it has awakened. The heart widens, the mind quiets, the body strengthens. Everything begins to flow more lightly. Service, far from being a burden, becomes a subtle pleasure, an internal joy that springs without an external cause. The sixth flame also teaches to serve with discernment. Not every call is a mission. Not every request is aligned. The disciple learns to differentiate serving out of compassion from serving out of guilt or obligation. He learns to respect the other's time. He learns to say no when necessary, because he knows that each soul has its own rhythm of awakening. He offers light, but does not force the opening. He sows, but does not demand harvest. This balance between surrender and freedom is a sign of spiritual maturity. It is the mark of the sixth flame vibrating with intensity. With the continuous practice of altruistic service, the disciple begins to perceive a new type of strength emerging within. It's no longer a force that imposes itself. It's a force that sustains, a silent force, invincible, unshakable. It's the strength of coherence between who one is, what one feels, what one speaks, and what one does. This magnetic coherence begins to attract people, situations, and resources that resonate with the disciple's mission. Life starts to cooperate. The path opens, the universe responds. Abundance flows not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of a being aligned with the flow of creation. The sixth flame ends the illusion of separation between the individual and the collective. The awakened disciple realizes that every action of theirs resonates within the whole. Each thought, each choice, each word impacts the collective field. Therefore, their ethics become vibrational. They no longer act based on external rules, but on inner integrity. They know that their light is not their own. It belongs to the whole, passing through them. And for this reason, they honor it, they revere it, they share it, without vanity, without attachment, only with gratitude for having become a vessel. And so, the sixth flame prepares the disciple for the final stage of the journey, unification with the inner Christ. The entire path up to this point, from presence to purification, from love to silence, from word to service, has been preparation for this moment of fusion. The light is no longer outside. It is no longer in Jesus, in the texts, in the symbols. It is fully alive within the being. The next flame will not be a stage. It will be a return to what has always been. The seventh flame awaits, and it does not ask for effort, only surrender. Everything that has been traversed up to this point, the awakening of presence, purification, the illuminated heart, mental silence, the living word, service, prepares the disciple for a climax, the moment when the journey ceases to be movement and becomes absolute rest. The seventh flame, the most subtle and powerful of all, is not a stage to be understood by the mind or conquered by effort. It is the return to the origin, to the essence, to the pure divine presence that dwells in the innermost being. It does not ignite, it is recognized. When the disciple cuts through all layers of illusion, when they let go of all the images they have built of themselves, when they even surrender the idea of a path, what remains is the inner Christ, the eternal spark, the I am, the indivisible light that was never born and will never die. This flame is represented by the white light, the synthesis of all colors, the union of all frequencies, the state where duality no longer holds. Here, there is no more seeking, there is no more disciple, there is no more goal, there is only being in fullness, in wholeness, in unity with the all. The initiate who recognizes this flame no longer speaks about the divine, he is the divine in expression. Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," not as a metaphor, but as an affirmation of the ultimate truth. He was not an intermediary between God and men, he was the mirror of what everyone is in essence. The seventh flame reveals this with radical clarity. Christ is not a historical being. He is a frequency, a state of consciousness where the lower self dissolves into the higher self. Reaching this point requires letting go of everything, including the idea of arrival, including spiritual identity, including the notion of mission. The seventh flame burns the last veil, that of separation between seeker and sought. It tolerates no form of attachment, not even to the spiritual process itself. Here, love ceases to be directed and becomes absolute. Peace does not depend on circumstances, it is unconditional. Wisdom does not express itself in words, it manifests in silence. The disciple becomes like the wind, invisible yet present, silent yet transformative. There is no more effort, there is only flow. The being becomes a transparent channel of the spirit. In this state, the duality between good and evil, light and shadow, right and wrong begins to lose strength. The inner Christ sees everything as an expression of a single field of consciousness. There is no more judgment, only recognition. Suffering, once fought against, is now seen as part of the path to awakening. The other, previously perceived as separate, is now felt as an extension of the same being. Compassion is no longer a choice, it is the natural state. And love, which began as a feeling, now reveals itself as the substance of everything that exists. The seventh flame shows that there is nothing outside of the divine. Not pain, not error, not forgetfulness. Everything is a path of return to the light. This achievement is not euphoric. It is serene, silent, deeply stable. The initiate may stand in the face of chaos and remain unshaken. They may be wounded and continue to radiate peace. They may lose everything and yet know that they lack nothing, for they no longer see themselves as a separate identity. They are the whole, manifesting at that specific point in time and space. They recognize that form is transient, but the being is eternal. And from this recognition, all actions become an expression of this universal love. There is no longer a choice between serving or not serving. Everything they do, even the simplest gesture, becomes a blessing. In the mystical tradition, this state has been described as mystical union, samadhi, nirvana, enlightenment, merging with the I Am. But all these words are just fingers pointing to something that cannot be spoken. It can only be experienced. The inner Christ is not an ideal. It is the ultimate reality. It has always been there, behind the masks, beneath the layers, beyond the personality. Jesus came not to place himself above, but to remind us of this truth. And the disciples who closely followed his deepest teachings knew this. John, Mary Magdalene, Thomas, they all experienced this state and left symbolic and veiled records for those who would come later. The seventh flame is the hidden inheritance of these teachings. The body also transforms at this stage, not because it becomes immune to death, but because it starts to vibrate at a different frequency. Density gives way to lightness. The cells respond to consciousness. The internal systems harmonize. Many initiates report spontaneous healing, rejuvenation, absence of diseases. But this is not sought as a goal. It's a consequence of a life aligned with the source. Breathing becomes slower. Heartbeats more measured. The electromagnetic field expands. There is a constant lightness in the body, a feeling of slight floating, even amidst the heaviest tasks. The body becomes a consecrated temple, an active dwelling of the divine presence. The mind, already purified by previous flames, now becomes an absolute mirror. It reflects the divine will without distortion. The thoughts that arise are like gentle instructions, inner guides that direct actions aligned with the greater good. There is no more noise, doubt, fear. Discernment is clear. Decisions flow with confidence. Psychological time disappears. Everything happens in the now. Even when planning or remembering, it is done with total anchoring in the present. The past loses its burden. The future ceases to be a concern. The being lives in the eternal now, where eternity reveals itself in each moment. The experience of the seventh flame also dissolves death, not as a physical event, but as a concept. The awakened disciple knows that they were never born and will never die. Consciousness is continuous. The body changes, but the self remains. And this knowledge changes everything. Fear disappears. Urgency vanishes. Life becomes a celebration. Every encounter is seen as a reunion. Every separation is understood as a transient illusion. Loss is understood as transformation. The cycle of existence is honored with reverence. The initiate now does not live for themselves. They live as an expression of the one consciousness. They are no longer a human trying to be divine. They are the divine living the human experience. In this state, miracles cease to be extraordinary events. They become natural. Multiplications, healings, instant manifestations, striking synchronicities, all of this flows with simplicity, because there is no more resistance. The vibrational field of the initiate is in complete resonance with the source. They don't need to wish. They manifest. They don't need to control. They allow. Life takes care of itself through them. This is the true power. A power that doesn't dominate, but liberates. That doesn't impose, but inspires. That doesn't shine to blind, but to ignite lights in others. The seventh flame makes the being a spiritual sun, not the center of the universe, but a source of heat, light, and life for all around. When this flame is active, even silence becomes a verb. The mere presence of the initiate heals, awakens, pacifies. They could be sitting in silence and yet transform the environment. They could be among crowds and yet remain in unity with the whole. They could be attacked and yet respond with love. They could be forgotten by the world and yet live in fullness. Because they are no longer the one who began the journey. They are the journey itself, the very flame, the very light that ignited the universe. The unification with the inner Christ is not an end. It's the beginning of a new way of existing, a new cycle where the being lives anchored in eternity, silently serving the evolution of all that exists. The mission does not end. It simply changes shape. The disciple now becomes an instructor, guide, healer, but also continues learning, because infinite consciousness has no end. The seventh flame is not a throne, it's a field, a vibrational state where one dwells forever, even though the steps continue on earth. And it is in this state that one finally understands the hidden legacy left by Jesus and his closest disciples. Christ consciousness is not a destination, it's an identity. And this is the mystery that calls us back home. The final flame does not go out, for it does not burn with physical fire, but with the eternal glow of recognition. After unification with the inner Christ, the initiate no longer walks as before. He does not live for himself, nor does he define himself by labels, titles, or traditions. He becomes a continuation of a silent lineage that has existed since the dawn of humanity, the lineage of the awakened. And it is on this lineage, invisible to the world's eyes but eternally present, that the final revelation is raised. The disciples of Jesus who lit the seven flames did not disappear in history. Their legacy was not buried with their bodies. They became pillars of a living current that never broke. This is the best-kept secret of the Christian spiritual tradition, that the true followers of Christ continued their mission in silence, passing the flame from heart to heart, from soul to soul, through the centuries. While official history recorded wars, councils, and dogmas, this current remained alive in the underground of spirituality. Hidden groups, initiatory orders, secret communities, all essentially maintained the teachings of the seven flames. The words of Jesus, recorded in the apocryphal Gospels, in the Gnostic texts, and in oral traditions, were transmitted with zeal and fidelity among the initiates. These disciples did not seek visibility. They knew that the truth does not need to be defended, only lived. And so they did. While empires fell and religions fragmented, they continued to light the way in prepared hearts, revealing that the path is not outside but within, that Christ is not exclusive but universal, that salvation is not external but the awakening of the light that already dwells in every being. The presence of these anonymous disciples has quietly shaped many of the most authentic spiritual movements on the planet. They were among the Essenes, the Therapeuti of Alexandria, the Sufis, the Desert Masters, the Cathars, the medieval alchemists, the mystics of the Kabbalah, the enlightened yogis, the indigenous healers. In every true tradition, there are echoes of the seven flames. The compassionate presence, the profound silence, the healing word, the selfless service, the gaze that sees beyond, the vibration that transforms, all this is a trace of this lineage. The legacy of Jesus' disciples is not doctrine, it is frequency. A frequency that is recognized not with the eyes, but with the heart. And those who feel it, even without knowing its origin, are connected to this invisible network of awakened souls working for the awakening of humanity. In modern times, this legacy begins to emerge more forcefully. Not because the truth has changed, but because humanity is more prepared to receive it. The crises of the world, social ruptures, ecological collapses are not just signs of decay, they are also symptoms of a collective spiritual birth. The dark night of the planetary soul precedes the dawn of a new consciousness. And the contemporary disciples, those who, in silence, seek the truth, who meditate, who heal, who teach, who serve, are the living continuation of Jesus' lineage. They do not proclaim themselves masters. They do not found religions. They do not demand followers. They live the way. They are the new bearers of the seven flames, even if they do not know the names, because the flame does not demand a label, it just needs to be kept lit. Each human being who awakens their presence, who purifies their attachments, who opens their heart, who silences their mind, who speaks with truth, who serves with love, and who unifies with their divine essence is, unknowingly, responding to the same call that echoed on the banks of the Jordan 2,000 years ago. The voice saying, "Follow me," wasn't an invitation to an external path, but to a journey back to the light. The true gospel was never a book, but a vibration, a state of consciousness, a remembrance. The disciples knew that the mission was not to convert, but to ignite. And this mission remains alive in all who choose the truth, even when it requires courage, in all who remain faithful to the inner light, even in the face of collective darkness. This is the time of revelation, not because a secret will be revealed to the world with pomp, but because thousands of souls will begin to remember. They will feel the silent call of the flames and realize that they are not alone, that there are others, that there is a network, a symphony of lights igniting around the planet, not under a flag, but under the same sky, not in the name of a religion, but in the name of living truth. This is the new age of Christ, not the era of temples and dogmas, but of conscious presence in every human being. The return of Christ will not be an external event. It is already happening within each one who chooses to live with integrity, compassion, and awareness. The return is internal, it is collective, it is now. The disciples of Jesus left living codes in their actions. The way they walked, how they touched, how they breathed. Each gesture carried the energy of the flame. These codes are still active. They are in the spiritual DNA of humanity. With every practice of silence, of gratitude, of forgiveness, of compassion, these codes are reactivated. And the more they are activated, the more the Christic frequency will settle in the collective field, not as a belief, but as a vibrational reality. A new earth begins to emerge not with decrees, but with sustained vibrations. And the guardians of these vibrations are those who chose to live the path. It doesn't matter where they are, under what name they walk, in what language they express themselves. They are one body, one light. This video is not just an explanation, it's a call to action, a reminder, a mirror. If you've made it this far, it's not by chance. There's something in you that already recognizes this frequency. Perhaps you haven't named it yet. Maybe you haven't fully lived it, but it's there, latent, alive, ready to ignite. The seven flames are not owned by any tradition. They are the hidden map of the soul's awakening. They are steps of ascension that were hidden behind the world's curtain. Now, this curtain is opening, and what was once secret becomes accessible, not by concession, but by vibrational merit. Those who vibrate with the truth receive the truth. Those who seek sincerely find. Those who serve with love ignite. Nothing will be the same again. Once the flame is lit, it does not go out. It may weaken for moments, but it will never be forgotten. It becomes a compass, a lighthouse, a home. The initiate is now guided by the inner light, and everything around begins to align. Decisions become clearer, paths become more fluid, words become more precise, relationships become more authentic, and the mission becomes more evident. Even when they don't know how, they know why. Because they feel. Because they recognize. Because they vibrate at the same frequency as those who, 2,000 years ago, said yes to a call that transcends time and space. This is the final revelation. You are part of this lineage, not by title, not by external initiation, but by vibrational affinity. You have been called, and now the choice is in your hands. Continue as before, or live as a bearer of light. There is no imposition. There is an invitation. There is no pressure. There is possibility. The 7 flames have been presented not as doctrine, but as a mirror. Look within. See where you are. And if you decide to follow, know that you are not alone. There are others. There are many. There is a silent network that supports you. And there is a light within you that has never gone out. Now is the time to let it shine. Not for the world to see you, but for the world to remember. Mind Unfettered, now that the 7 flames have been revealed, we want to know from you. Which of these flames is most active in your journey at this moment? Which one has touched something deep in your soul? Write in the comments. Your sharing is not just a personal expression, but also an act of collective manifestation, because each time you write with intention, this light anchors even more in reality. Share your flame. We read everything, and together, we expand this frequency. And if you felt the call of the 7 flames, wait until you discover the hidden map left by Jesus with 33 steps to enlightenment. Yes, this knowledge exists, and it continues in the next video available right now on your screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. You will understand how these steps connect with the flames and reveal an even deeper path of expansion. Mind Unfettered. This journey is no longer individual. We are walking together, like a single flame igniting thousands of others. Click now. Continue the awakening.